The Institute for Faith and Freedom at Grove City College presents Liberty Mail with the Student Fellows of Faith and Freedom.
Welcome back to another episode of Liberty Mail. This is Libby Krieger.
And I'm Grace Riley.
And we're coming to you from the underground studio here at Grove City College. Liberty Mail is with the Institute for Faith and Freedom, talking to you about top conservative wins of the week. So, Streeter, do you want to roll in the video for our first win of the week? It's a very surprising video. Most of you, you might have seen it, you might have not.
Oh, I've seen this.
Very fun.
You own all of Twitter or Facebook or what have you. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't even have to be transparent. You could secretly ban one party's candidate or all of its candidates, all of its nominees, or you could just secretly turn down the reach of their stuff and turn up the reach of something else, and the rest of us might not even find out about it till after the election. Elon Musk says this is all to help people because he is just a free speech, philosophically clear, open-minded helper. You own.
So there's the video. First thought, is this satire?
Yeah, honestly, is that insane? Because, looking back, clearly that's what was happening at Twitter, but on the other side. So it looks fake that he would be saying that because it's actually so true. You're right, it looks like satire.
Yeah, and so this is in response to Elon Musk buying Twitter. $44 billion, I believe, was the agreement. And it really just seems like this would be some sort of joke. You'd think the cognitive dissonance would set in at some point, saying all these things that legitimately did happen to the other side that he disagrees with. When you see President Trump was kicked off of Twitter, and you had other candidates kicked off Twitter, and specifically what he's talking about when you're turning down the reach, you can think of the Hunter Biden laptop story. That was something that the Media Research Center did a poll, and they found that the election could have turned out very differently. Many voters didn't know about it because the way that the media suppressed that story, on Twitter especially, is an area where they suppressed it. And so you're seeing exactly what he's saying could happen, and everyone's hysterical about it now, possibly happening on Twitter to the left, exactly happened to the right.
Exactly. And I think it's important to look at, well, why did Elon feel the need to buy Twitter? And the root of that is because this exact censorship and bias from big tech was coming at the right and has been for years now. I mean, we can look at President Trump being banned while the Taliban is still allowed to have Twitter accounts, or Kathy Griffin holding up Donald Trump's bloody head and not being banned. And that's totally okay. So all of these things, like, there are clear, clean-cut examples of bias, and conservatives have been being banned on these platforms. I have friends that have been banned.
Shadow banned, too.
Yeah, my friend ALX, like, he had a big Twitter account. He was a conservative. He was, reporting news, basically, and he got banned because Twitter didn't like what he had to say. And so we've seen this going on, and that's why Elon even bought it in the first place. And it's interesting, especially since Elon Musk is advocating for free speech. He tweeted the other day and said, "By free speech, I simply mean that which matches the law. I am against censorship that goes far beyond the law. If people want less free speech, they will ask the government to pass laws to that effect. Therefore, going beyond the law is contrary to the will of the people." And he additionally said, "For Twitter to deserve public trust, it must be politically neutral, which effectively means upsetting the far right and the far left equally." So Elon's trying
He's not even necessarily a conservative.
Exactly. But he wants it to be a platform that actually has that free speech because honestly, it hasn't had free speech for a while, and Twitter's been lying by saying that they have free speech while censoring everything. I mean, you can't talk about COVID, you can't say that masks don't work on Twitter, or you'll get flagged and censored.
From the leftist narrative is basically misinformation or disinformation in a lot of these areas.
Which is exactly the point. There are certain topics, I know working in politics, that you can't tweet about. For example, you can't question the election that happened. You can't say anything having to do with January 6th. You can't say anything about COVID or about masks not working or about the vaccine, and you will get flagged. So that is censorship.
And he's talking about a politically neutral platform, and the way that the left, or many of these radical lefts, I'm not saying every Democrat or every liberal is reacting this way, but the ones who are, you can tell that if they're so scared of a neutral platform, they just don't want an even playing field. And they're scared that their ideas won't win in an area that allows all ideas.
Exactly. And I think that just says, honestly, everything. And yeah, Congressman Troy Nehls also tweeted, I think this is a great point. They didn't need a disinformation governance board, which we'll get to in a minute, until Elon Musk threatened to control their narrative, which I think is exactly the point, because now the DHS, Biden's administration, wants to launch a disinformation governance board that is dedicated to countering misinformation. So now they want to go from Biden's administration at a government level to decide what's misinformation, what's hate speech. And that's being headed, by the way, by someone who is a radical leftist, which is proven and has been biased towards the left and was involved in all the Russia misinformation and things like that.
Well, it just shows that they will use any power that they have to set their narrative. So whether that was Twitter before or big corporations, social media, big tech, now government, whenever they've lost the power of this platform of big tech. And that goes to show the argument that I've often made on this show is that conservatives are so hesitant to use political power. Meanwhile, the left just bulldozes with political power. Any power they have, they use it. And that is why we can't sit back and watch these things happen and not use the power that we have. And we'll get to another win later in this show about using political power. But this is a perfect example of how the left is not scared by any means to use every single ounce of power they have to just bulldoze their narrative into the American people.
Especially since Elon bought Twitter, a day ago, and this is already something that's coming up.
Mass hysteria. I saw another media host basically equate conservative speech that is now going to be allowed on Twitter to yelling fire in a crowded theater, and how basically it just shows how abominable they believe our beliefs to be. And so it shows like we are living in such different realities that they believe what we prescribe to in our belief system needs to be censored because it's dangerous and it's hateful. But I believe that we abide by truth and just natural law. And so we're living in two different realities of what is true. And that's another reason why we can't just sit back and let them bulldoze us, because at some point we're not going to be allowed to speak not even our truth, because I feel like that's a leftist rhetoric term, but the truth, yeah.
And we're already seeing that. I mean, again, on Twitter, you can't talk about what a man and a woman is. You're not allowed to say certain things that are the truth already if it offends someone. So we're already seeing this on Twitter. We're seeing it pretty much across the board, honestly. And it's also great that Elon bought Twitter. That's a good thing. But we're far from done, because there's still Facebook, Instagram, like all these other platforms where this censorship is happening, and it's off social media too. We see things in the mainstream media and culture. So across the board, there is a war on truth, which I know we've talked about before, because it's very true. The left doesn't want to admit that there is a truth, that there are facts. The left is all about moral relativism and saying, well, whatever feels good is fine and is the truth, but that's really just not the reality.
Yeah, and I believe there are some on the right and some in the middle, maybe some libertarians who would call us alarmists, like, oh, they're being dramatic. That is not true of the left at all. And I'm not saying this is true of every Democrat or every liberal or most common sense Americans, but when we're talking about these radical leftists who are pushing a lot of the change on this country, these activists, the truth is they really hate you and they want to destroy your way of life. And there's no other way around it. I mean, when you think about it, all these issues we're seeing with transgenderism in schools and all of these issues at the education level, you want to teach your children that there's a man and a woman? No, you're not allowed to do that. That's what they want to destroy that thinking of tradition, Western civilization. And so there's really no way to just sit back and let the radicals take over without fighting back, at least giving it a shot.
Well, especially I think a good example of this is the fact that the left is going behind parents' backs with that. So in schools now, they're allowed to, in certain districts, basically effectively tell, like, if a kid comes out as transgender at any age, any level, elementary school.
They don't have to tell the parents, right?
Exactly. They don't have to tell the parents. They can assist them with surgeries or other things like that and not tell the parents, which shows the war on parents, too.
Yeah. And actually, kind of related to that, I've seen so many TikToks that these girls are like, I'm so thankful to my mom for letting me be in my tomboy phase without having me switch over to a guy. Because, I mean, there's truth to the fact that, like, little kids just sometimes have different interests. It's okay, like, if a boy is playing with a Barbie one day, doesn't mean he's a girl. Same thing with girls.
Exactly.
If they're interested in sports, it doesn't mean that they should be a boy. You are your sex, and you might have different interests, but that doesn't change everything.
And it's also the parents' job to be teaching their children what their gender means, and other things like that. And when parents don't do that, they're misleading their kids, confusing their kids, which is setting a lot of them up to be confused as they're growing up.
Exactly. Well, kind of hopping over to our second one from that about talking about gender, this is a great example of using political power. So in Oklahoma, Governor Kevin Stitt, I believe is how you say it, signed a law that banned the non-binary status on birth certificates, which just seems common sense. I mean, there's a man and a woman, and you shouldn't be able to have anything else on your birth certificate or any other form of document.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point here is, why are we even having this conversation in the first place?
We shouldn't need to.
But obviously we are, and throughout our culture, that's something that's coming up a lot. But again, when a baby's just born, they either are one thing or the other. There's no in between there. So I don't really, I'm kind of confused about why there's confusion about that, I guess.
Yeah, well, 15 and 16 come July, states allow you to change your status on your birth certificate or just from the start have the non-binary status. So, I mean, 15, 16 states is a good chunk of the 50, and so that just shows you kind of where we're not quite at half, but that's still concerning that we're having that big chunk of states allowing non-binary status.
Yeah, which is crazy, and it goes back to the parents a lot too, obviously, because, again, these parents that are raising their kids basically saying, actually, the sex you are doesn't matter, and you can just be whatever you want, and again, just raising kids with all this moral relativism without any truth or any, foundation in anything is setting, I believe, these kids up for failure.
I'm sure you're going to have a lot of progressive parents, too, who, whenever their child is born, they'll just choose the non-binary status of them. Be like, well, let them choose later and see what they want to do.
Yeah, and that's just a bad start, honestly.
Yeah. And what I kind of see at the heart of this is this postmodern understanding of the world. Like you talked about moral relativism, this Anthony Kennedy quote, I think, really grasps the essence of this misunderstanding of reality. So I believe this is actually in Roe versus Wade, his opinion. He says, "At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life." That is saying so much without saying anything at all. It makes no sense. And it's almost like whenever you're in class and you didn't read the book and the teacher asks you a question, you just have to make something up that sounds fluffy. It's like, what? At the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence? No,
and I think
that is not liberty. Liberty is not licentiousness, and liberty is not self-definition and expressionism.
Very well said, and I think it all goes back to the root of, obviously, we're here because of faith and freedom, and, they say that all of these political problems are really religious problems, and I think that's so true, and this is a perfect example of when you have kind of people rooting for the absence of God in culture, and, raising kids without any faith or any foundation or truth. When you have that flourishing in culture, basically, that's why we're having all these problems, and the answer to a lot of them is to focus on God, focus on faith, and that's really the only way, honestly.
Yeah, that's very true. It reminds me of Dr. Truman's book on, I forget what it's called, but it's about the modern self and the triumph of the modern self, and how kind of expressionism has taken over our thinking of reality. And I mean, Anthony Kennedy, was a Supreme Court justice, and the fact that he is mainstreaming this postmodern delusion is, I think, it's an indicator of where higher education and academia and just where like a decent part of not a whole chunk of America, but I mean there is a group that does think like this. Obviously, if we're seeing the outgrowth of this being such laws as allowing non-binary status, so huge win that they're taking the political power they have in Oklahoma, having the governorship, and signing this into law, and also the legislature. And this comes after an executive order from the governor in 2021 that did the same thing. So I think it's good that we're making this, though, codified into legislative action.
It certainly is.
So that's like another aspect of the win culturally, but also institutionally to have it go through the legislature now. So yeah, anything else you have to say on this, Grace, or should we get to our third and really exciting win?
I'm good to move on if you are, Libby.
Okay, so third win is actually more of an announcement, but we are passing the baton. Grace Riley will be the new co-host next year, filling my spot with Erin on Liberty Mail, and she'll be a marketing fellow. So tell me about what you want to bring to Liberty Mail, or just what do you want to bring to the fellowship next year?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm so excited about this. I just love the Institute for Faith and Freedom, and I've loved having the privilege of coming on here with you and Erin, and I'm just so excited to kind of keep it going, even though it will be a tough spot to fill because Libby is amazing, but she's graduating and is going to be doing big, amazing things.
No
so
one
yay,
better
Libby.
to fill my spot, honestly.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really excited to see what
you.
you guys do together.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, I'm very excited for the fellowship and just to bring, honestly, I just...
A nice conservative perspective,
yeah,
based
a
perspective
nice
to Liberty Mail.
perspective, and also to just, fight the good fight and stand up for my values and all of our values, and to hopefully bring conservative values about faith, freedom, limited government, all these things to as many people as we possibly can.
Yeah, so this is one of my last studio episode, but we'll have some ongoing content over the next few weeks. We have a few more little interviews that we did during the IFF conference. So we have one with Annabelle Rutledge, so that will be a really interesting episode coming out in the next few weeks. And then after that, we will have season 2 of Meet the Scholars. So I interviewed a bunch of different professors on campus who have diverse perspectives in their field. So we have some history, some business, and so it's really interesting to hear all their perspectives on their specific discipline, but then how that relates to faith and freedom. So those will be coming out over the summer, and I believe they'll probably continue that season 3 maybe next year. We'll see what happens with that. But yeah, this is just passing the baton to Grace. Really excited to see what you and Erin do together.
Well, and I'm excited to see where life takes you. And again, you've done such an amazing job on this podcast, and I know everyone's going to miss you.
Well, thanks, Grace. And thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of Liberty Mail. We'll see you here again. Well, I won't see you here again.
Well, I'll see you next year.
Yeah, you got it, Grace. Subscribe down to the podcast if you're on Apple Music or Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And if you're on YouTube, hit the bell, subscribe. And Grace and Erin will see you again next year.
Thanks, Libby.
For more information on this podcast or other programs, please visit faithandfreedom.com.